بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Alhamdulillah, in the introductory sessions before beginning the text on Nur al-Idah, Imam Shurunbulali's compendium on the details of the fiqh of worship, we are in the third of our introductory lessons. And this is a very important aspect of study, which is how to master Islamic texts. Right? And this is something we touched upon conceptually in the previous lesson, that it is not sufficient for the student of knowledge just to go through a curriculum of Islamic studies, but rather what counts is mastery, right? And this idea that Islamic knowledge is like a craft in that sense, that a person of knowledge is someone who knows. It's not just someone who has some ability to look things up, for example, right? That is not sufficient. So you can call this that طريقة التمكن في الكتب يعني الشرعية, how to master Islamic texts. And the contention basically is that for fulfilling your personal benefiting from Islamic knowledge, but also your ability to be of benefit to others, you need to have mastery. You need to have mastery. Mastering a little is better than covering a lot. Right? It's as simple as that. Mastering a little bit is worth more than covering a lot. Because when you are faced with an issue in your own life related to your faith, your practice, the halal and haram, other matters, to say, oh, I studied that, doesn't benefit you, right? That you have even something related to like akhlaq, that you said or did something and now you're wondering, would that count as conceit? So, oh, I studied about conceit in this book and this book and this book, right? Sum'ah. But you have no clue whether that was right or wrong. So practically, that is where, at a personal level, the one who knows, right? And the one who doesn't know, it was like tourism. Yeah. You went to Rome and saw all the sights, but you don't know Rome. You just know some landmarks and kind of, the Romans were there. But you knew that before you went to Rome, right? So this issue of mastery is what we're going to touch upon a little bit today. And this relates to the nature of Islamic knowledge, right? The nature of Islamic knowledge. That the purpose of al-ilm al-nafi', right, of beneficial knowledge, is al-amal, is acting upon it. That's the nature of guidance. Guidance is knowledge that is to be acted upon in order to attain the good of this life and the good of the next, in pursuit of the good pleasure, closeness and love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? That's beneficial knowledge. So for the knowledge to be of benefit to you, you need to know it in order to be able to act upon it. Some knowledge you need all the time, right? You need all the time. It's on an ongoing basis, right? Related to core issues of faith, related to your purification prayer. There's a subset of that knowledge that you are either living in your consciousness or acting upon on an ongoing basis. There's other knowledge that is common contingent knowledge, that if something happens, then you need that knowledge. And then there is rare contingent knowledge, but that is significant in that you're not in a situation where you have doubts about your faith, etc., but something comes up. You're sitting in the library and the atheists, the AT&T, the atheist thugs of Toronto decide to gang up on you at the library. You're just sitting there trying to mind your business, and they ganged up on you, and the grandson of Richard Dawkins gave you 13 curveballs that spun your head. Now there, say, oh, I studied the proofs for the existence of God. Doesn't cut it. Do you know it? Not to argue with them, but just for your own sake. Right? That they raised objections about the eternity of, like, why do we have to assume that the world has a beginning? Huduthul alam. So yeah, that came up in this book and this book, and there's a line of poetry about it, and it's called what's it called? The Matalibu Sab'a, and but you don't know them. How does it benefit you at that moment? Right? And even you say, oh, I could go and look it up, but between the shubha coming to you and your coming to the response, هل يستوي الذين يعلمون والذين لا يعلمون? Are those who know like those who don't? The one who, when the shubha hit, they already know. That's like the one who has the waves hit, but there's already a sea wall in place. So the waves hit the barrier and they go back. And the one who the waves flood their little island, and now they have to get the water, drain the water from the island. What is the superior state? Right? The harm of the waves when they crash the shore itself and flood the land that is your heart, and what they take away of certitude and confidence and so on, right? And likewise with your practice, right? That so the nature of Islamic knowledge at a personal level entails that what counts is what you know, in order to be able to act on what you generally act upon. And that's also faith, iman. That we do not study aqidah for intellectual sophistication. Our belief, our aqaid, our umur that it is the ilm al-tawheed that we study is ilm sara ayanan, is points of knowledge that are beheld. Right? That are beheld. It's not just to know and understand, that is your living consciousness. قُلْ كُلٌّ مِّنْ عِنْدِ اللَّهِ. This is all from Allah. Right? And so there's the knowledge that you need to live on an ongoing basis. There's the common contingently needed knowledge, and then there is the rare contingently needed knowledge, but that is of significance. How many times have you done tayammum in your life, Sayyidi? You have? Like actual tayammum that you needed to do. How many times? Yeah, less than 5, right? And you've lived a few years, right? But if you were in that situation, like if someone who doesn't know, they said, oh, the conditions for tayammum, we covered it in this book and that book and that book. But now you're at the hospital, may Allah grant you health. Can I make tayammum right now or not? And if an emergency happened, you may not have the luxury there to go look it up in a book. You texted Sheikh Zubair and he didn't answer you. So what are you going to do? Right? But also the mastery matters for our ability to benefit another person. You're just walking to visit a friend of yours who's at the hospital and someone asks, they see that you look religious, they ask you, that my mother is in there, she wants to pray, what can she do? The one who knows is not like the one who doesn't. Right? إِنَّمَا فَضْلُ الْعِلْمِ الْعَمَلُ بِهِ. As Imam Abu Hanifa says, the virtue of knowledge is to be able to act upon it, yourself and others. So that's why mastery matters. Right? That's why mastery matters. Anything worth studying is worth mastering. That is min bid'a al-asr. That, okay, it's enough to just understand it. Right? Because if you take the attitude that's enough to understand, then you're basically saying that you don't really need to study it. Just gain some awareness of how to access the texts and then just look things up. Okay? Then you could just say that we don't need to learn, we just use an encyclopedia and khalas. But that's not how ilm works. But it's also important to appreciate that mastery is not mere memorization. Right? Mastery is precise understanding. Right? Because what is ilm? Right? Right? Ilm is ma'rifatul ma'lum ala ma huwa alayhi, is to know that which is knowable, or to understand what is knowable as it actually is. Right? And beneficial knowledge is to know what is as it actually is, على وجه يمكن العمل به على وجه يرضي الله تعالى. Beneficial knowledge is to know things as they are, with a knowledge that gives you the capacity to act in accordance with the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with respect to that matter, right? Which is, firstly, to stay within the limits of Allah. Number 2, to pursue the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? That's the purpose of the knowledge. So this issue in our times of lack of mastery is a big fitna. That, anybody you ask, okay, someone says, I've studied such and such book. There's just one question. Do you know it? And the answer, there's only 2 answers. Yes or no. Right? Yes or no. Yes means that if we take the 3 types of scenarios, the ongoing scenario, what are the 3 types of knowledge that you need? The ongoing issues, the common contingencies, and the rare contingencies. You know a text if you know all 3. But at the very least, someone who studied the text, but the ongoing things that you need, you don't know those, right? Then you should pay, like people talk about, that, you have to pay reparations to the native people, or pay reparations to the African Americans, whatever. You have to pay reparations to your teachers because you wasted their time. Okay? They gave their precious time to teach you, and what did you do with it? You don't know even the common sense things, right? Let alone the common contingencies, right? And the rare contingencies are very significant. someone asks you that we purchase, 25 kilos of bananas on on the basis of their weight. What do we have to do before we resell them? Before we eat them? What do you have to do if you bought 25 kilos of bananas on the condition that it's 25 kilos of bananas? What is wajib to do before you can eat the bananas or before you can sell them? Anyone online? Is it unmuted? Go ahead. Anyone who studied Quduri should know this, right? It is what? So, go ahead.
To count the bananas.
Not to count them. It's on condition of weight. Let's say. To weigh them. And what's the ruling of weighing them before you eat them, or before you sell them, etc.? It's wajib shar'an. It's wajib, and very clearly, because otherwise there's a whole bunch of reasons which you should know in fiqh al-mu'amalat, and these are day-to-day issues. If you don't even know it for your own practice, right? But then someone asks you, they say, it's fine, don't worry about it, just go ahead. So you've just misguided people on a small thing, but you've just helped them commit a sin, right? So there's all kinds of things that relate to living the religion that are important in this, right? But then the need, the critical need to teach people, to guide people, to address people's issues, right? Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib is reported to have said, and this is what's related from, I haven't seen this related with an isnad, but this is what's related in some of the books. But min ghayri isnad, إنما أعرض الناس عن الدين لقلة ما يرون من انتفاع أهله به. That people have only turned away from the religion because of how little they see its people benefiting from it. That has to do, there's a practical aspect to it, what they see of the practice of the people of religion or their character, but also one of the reasons there would be a lack of trust for the people of knowledge is because, as in a different context Abu Madian says, وَحَالُ مَنْ يَدَّعِيهَا كَمَا تَرَى, and the state of those who claim it is as you can see, right? That when they speak about an issue, does this exude authority, clarity, certitude, clarity? Does it instill confidence? No. Why? Because it lacks clarity, coherence, precision, right? There's a beautiful example of that, the year 2003 in Jordan, one of the giants of our age, Mufti Mahmoud Ashraf Usmani, Hafidhahullah Ta'ala, and please make dua for him, he's extremely sick. He came to Jordan. So we decided, he was with us for a few days. So we went on a trip with him, with Sheikh Amjad Rashid, Sheikh Iyad Al-Ghawj, Sheikh Ahmed Snobar, myself, with our local taxi driver who lived in our neighborhood, a friend of ours. So that day he borrowed a thobe from Sheikh Iyad Al-Ghawj because he says, Bidi albas Sheikh, Amel hali zaykum, like I'll look like you guys. And so he went on the trip. Mufti Mahmoud was sitting in the front. The rest of us are crowded on the back seat. And so we are asking him questions. And initially, after Mufti Mahmoud would respond, the taxi driver, Muhammad Lafi, would say, لكن شيخنا, لو سمحت, Sheikh, if you're, couldn't we say this and that? And he did that for the first 10, 15 minutes of the trip going out of Hammam. Then he was quiet. So we stopped at the first resting stop, which is the masjid of Sayyidina Abu Ubaidah. Says, I asked him, because we're friends, I said, at least, why are you sitting quiet now? You had a lot to say in the beginning. He says, Wallah, in the beginning I thought, زي أي واحد من المشايخ, that he's just like one of the other مشايخ. But بعد ما تكلم قلت خلاص اسكت. احترم حالك يا أبا لافي. He's Muhammad Lafi. Just have some self-respect. Keep quiet. Don't embarrass yourself. Wallah zalame fahman. That this guy really does understand. So he just kept quiet the rest of the trip. Said, this guy knows, so I'm not going to say anything. Right? And there's a reason why, and there's many other circumstances. There's been a compromising of Islamic institutions and a destabilizing of Islamic scholarship externally and from within. But there's also a reality that given all the challenges that the Ummah has faced, there's been a weakening. And we can't blame it. The Ummah has dealt with a lot. But we have to realize that this is not how the amana is to be fulfilled. So for people having confidence in the religion, the people who learn the religion and convey it, have to do it from a bedrock of mastery. You won't go to a doctor who says, well, I think you may need a heart transplant, but let's see. You'd be shocked. Like, what kind of heart surgeon are you? We're just going to open up your heart and see if you need a transplant. No. Like, a doctor who doesn't know what they're doing, you wouldn't entrust any part of your body to. So what about it? Let's call it. Should be fine, inshallah. That's far more important. Were your heart to stop working, it's not a big deal. You die a believer, you have eternity in paradise. It's not such a big deal. But you ruin your spiritual heart, that's what is dangerous. So there's 3 stages that we're going to touch upon briefly. First is, how do you prepare, right? So there's 5 things that you need to do to prepare, right? To acquire mastery, right? One is, the text you're studying, read it several times. You're not going to watch a movie that at the end, like sometimes you're sitting observing students are like, oh wow. It's like, it's like you're watching some TV series. Oh, that's who did it. Wow. Right? This is not a novel that you say, or a crime thriller that at the end of it, oh, so it was Zubayr who tried to marry Zubaydah. No, this is ilm. Okay? So read it several times. Right? And in order to be ready for the class, right? Many of the shuyukh say you should read the text at least 3 times. Like a quick read, then a qira'ah mustafhima, then to try to understand, and then a third reading to identify all the nuances. In that, look up expressions that are unclear. Every term. Anything that you don't know, either min jihati lugha, either in terms of language, or in terms of its technical meaning. What does this mean? Either look it up, which is ideal, or if you can't look it up, then at least note that this is what you need to ask about. Number 3, identify what are the key terms in this section. And like key terms would be key concepts. And that's where a commentary comes useful. Right? That there's no merit in I read the commentary, but you read it like you're just reading the paper. You dip in the commentary, particularly to define key terms and understand key concepts. And in doing so, identify everything you don't understand. Either you understand the meaning of the word, you don't understand the definition, you don't understand the concept, right? So identify what you don't understand. At the least, just put with a pencil, put a mark indicating what is it. But optimally, prepare your questions. Prepare your questions. If you prepare like this and you don't come to class with half a dozen questions, you're either really smart or the opposite. Right? You're really smart, you understand everything. And if you are, then identify yourself, because the ummah needs people like you. Or you're just a tourist, and while tourism helps run the world economy, but that's not what seeking knowledge is about. So prepare your questions, right? And then take notes on the text itself, right? The ideal case is to write out the text. The ideal case is write out the text, right? So you've read the text, identified what you understand and don't, write out the text, the matan, for example, right? And the most important thing before the class is to be very clear on definitions and key concepts and their explanations. Whether you understood it clearly, or at least you've identified what you're not quite clear about that concept. So you're ready either to clarify it through the explanation in the class, or you're ready to ask your questions related to the definitions and the key, certainly the key concepts, the key explanations. And then there's details that then you may see. Do I really need more to understand that more thoroughly or not? That comes second. Then in the class, right? So that's before the class, right? There's, these are some of the things we handle before the class, right? 7 things. Now in the class, there's one of the most blessed people that I've met in my life, Hajj Kamal. For a while he stopped attending the dhikr gatherings in Amman. He's actually isolated himself from all people for several years. Long story, but I visited him. I said, "Sidi, you don't come to the majalis anymore." He says, "Yeah, because," says, you have to do dhikr wholeheartedly, right? Says a lot of people there are, it's as if anta fil maqbara, you're in like the graveyard, right? He says dhikr is amal, but these guys are like al-amwat. He says the amwat are probably more active than these guys are, but sometimes it's like, a dars feels like a maqbara, in the sense that people are sitting there. Like if you could visualize the souls of the deceased, deceased are probably like talking to their neighbors and moving around. That's not how ilm works, right? That, your participation in the class needs to be active. Number one, take notes, right? Take notes. The ideal is that you're building on the notes that you've taken before the class, right? For that, have a note-taking system. Right? Because what is the definition of the intelligent person? This is one of the most amazing definitions that I've seen. Imam Ahmad Zarruq, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, he defines al-aqil man tarji'u tasarrufatuhu ila aslin thabit shar'iyyan kana aw aqliyan aw 'adiyyan. That al-aqil, the intelligent person, is the one, this is practical intelligence, is the one whose actions return to established principles. Right? من ترجع تصرفاته إلى أصل ثابت شرعيا كان, whether religious principles, أو عاديا, or customary principles. This is how people, intelligent people, do this matter. Purposeful people do it in this way. شرعيا كان أو عقليا, or rational principles or customary principles, right? Because people have norms because they work, right? They work. So have a note-taking system. And there are many note-taking systems out there. Many people like the Cornell note-taking system, and in many ways it's very close to what a lot of the ulama talk about effective note-taking, etc. But there are many systems, but have some system that works for you. Number 3, have your questions ready. Then the question may be already addressed in the class, or if it's not addressed in the class, then if appropriate, you ask it during the class. If not appropriate, you ask it after the class, within the time of the class, or you ask it after in the forum, etc. The ideal would be like with the online classes we have, with the number of people who attend, you should be tiring out your teachers. What I've seen of ulama is, my dearly beloved teacher, Shaykh Muhammad Qaylish, he used to prepare, when he was seeking knowledge in Aleppo, he used to study at night. It would be cooler at night. Okay? And he had worldly responsibilities during the day. So he used to go and knock on his teacher's doors. Please don't do this. I have family and kids. But an hour before Fajr or half an hour before Fajr. Because a lot of his teachers would be in his neighborhood. He would knock on their door. Said they'll be up for night worship. And he would ask them at the door. And ilmi questions. So pretty much every night he'd go to some teacher or the other. Then he figured, I'll go just before the adhan of Fajr. Then he thought about it further, and nobody ever objected. They'd go, he'd see them after Fajr prayer. He said probably better for them. But the student of knowledge who doesn't have questions, and are you min al-ahya or min al-amwat? Are you from the living or the dead? Right? It's like مثل الذي يذكر ربه والذي لا يذكر. The example of the one who remembers their Lord and the one who doesn't. And the prophetic expression is amazing. Right? The one who remembers their Lord, يذكر ربه والذي لا يذكر, and the one who doesn't remember. It doesn't mention their Lord, pointing to the fact that it is by remembrance that you have an ascription to Allah. Without remembrance, you don't have that ascription. كمثل الحي والميت is like the example of the living and the dead. The example of the student who neither prepares nor asks questions nor reviews is worse than the dead, because the dead at least have a soul, right? So have your questions ready. And then in class, what do you ask about? Firstly, what you need to understand the text. That's number 1. But number 2, you ask the questions, what do I need to live this, to bring this into my life? And secondly, what do people need to bring that into their lives? And you consider those 3 types of critical issues, right? Firstly, what are the day-to-day issues? What did we call them in the beginning? The living issues, right? That day to day you need it, right? Secondly, the common contingent issues, that if this happens, if that happens, so what would reasonably happen to you, right? Because if you think about, what if suddenly I fell out of an airplane, I got suspended in midair in a pocket of no gravity. It's not going to happen. That's not a common contingent issue. Right? What if I find myself on Mars? How would I pray there? Are you going there? No, it's not a common contingency, right? But there are common contingencies that have arisen in your life or could arise in your life given the section that you've given time to think about it. Or what could happen to other people in their circumstances. So you've thought about it. And third, what are critical issues? And if you've prepared, you've thought about it, you've read around the subject, etc. Also, the teacher may have raised issues that you think, okay, so given what the teachers mentioned, where would this arise? How would people deal with it, etc. So you think about it, you ask then either in the class or after the class. So that's some of what you ask about, right? Then this is only, the preparation and attendance is only 50% of your responsibility with respect to knowledge. Imam Abdul Rahman ibn al-Jawzi, rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentions in Sayyid al-Khatir that a seeker of knowledge should spend 50% of their they should spend 50% of their study time in review. Because ليس العلم ما أخذ إنما العلم ما بقي. Knowledge is not what you took, is what remains. Right? So if Uncle Tariq, whom Sidi Usman knows, Uncle Tariq's walking down the hall in the hospital, and someone says, brother, do you know if I have to get the nurses to take my mother to make wudu, she can't get up from the bed on her own? If Uncle Tariq says, auntie, I studied that several times. Nobody cares that you studied it several times. It came up in the Hidayah. Oh, mashallah, you studied the Hidayah? But if you don't know the answer to that question, what Hidayah do you have? Right? So that's the issue, right? That reviewing is critical to retain what you know. And amongst what the Mashayikh mentioned is to have a wird of review. To have a wird of review. Daily, weekly, you have a plan, okay, that you know, what am I studying right now? And you have a wird of review. One of the best systems that a number of Mashayikh mention, and I first heard it from Sheikh Amjad Rashid, who's one of the most impressive fuqaha I've met, Shafi'i faqih. May Allah protect and preserve him and grant him ever increasing barakah in all that he's doing. Is that if you're studying a text, you're trying to memorize a text, master a text, break it down into parts and take one part and review it daily, like you'd review something you're memorizing. So for example, Nur al-Idah, break it down into conceptual parts. The whole text, you break it down into 7 chunks or 9 chunks or however many, and have one part that you're working on, just reviewing for the purpose of retention. But you also review what you have studied. So all of what you've studied, you break that down. So you have one review just of the text for the purpose of repeating it, for the purpose of memorizing. Number 2, you have a review of what you've studied. So you retain the items that you've studied. Right? So you review them. You review the text itself. You review the definitions. You review the core concepts. Right? So that you ask yourself, what's the definition of this? What's the definition of that? And you review it till you know it. And then you go to the next part and you repeat it till you know it. Nobody cares, and it's of no consequence. I studied such and such. Doesn't matter. Do you know it? If the answer is no, then على نفسه فليبكي من ضاع عمره وليس له منها نصيب ولا سهم. Upon their own self, let cry one who has wasted their life and who doesn't have of it no share, nor part. Of course, that's Ibn al-Farid is talking about the divine presence, but that the higher reality also reflects on lesser realities. And then one of the facilitative elements for review, both of the text and of the lesson, is group study. It is group study. مدارسة. The ulama say, العلم بالمدارسة أثبت منه بالمطالعة. That knowledge is retained better through group study than it is through mere personal reading. And whether one sets up groups for that or one partners, has a buddy system, this helps tremendously. And the third element of after class, you can do this before class or after class, is to memorize. The ideal case is that you memorize 3 things. Right? You memorize the text that you're studying, you memorize all definitions, and you've memorized the key concepts, right? The key concepts, because the key concepts may come up in the teaching, right? In the teaching or in the commentary. So for example, in Nur al-Idah that we're covering, right? We will see that there are conditions for the validity of wudu. But all of them go back to one governing condition. Is that condition mentioned in the text? No. It comes up in the commentary. But that's a critical concept to understand. So ideally you memorize the text, the key definitions, the key concepts. What is wudu? Well, wudu is wudu, right? What is the difference between washing and wiping? What does it mean to wipe? Right? So you know the concept. So you memorize. How do you memorize? Just very briefly. In Sham they would say بالتكرار يتعلم الحمار, that through repetition even a donkey learns. Right? فضلا عن بني آدم, right? Let alone the human being. Repeat. Right? I used to see Shaykh Imam Zaid Shakir, may Allah protect and preserve him, sitting at Jamia Shaykh Muhyiddin with a sibha, with a text in front of him. And the section that he was working on, just repeat it. So if you repeat anything 33 times, it'll be pretty hard to forget it. Right? So repetition. Secondly, write it out. I mean, you write out for the purpose of your notes, but the section you're working on, write it out again. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, الَّذِي عَلَّمَ بِالْقَلَمِ, the one who was taught by the pen. Write it out. Third, test yourself. Both test your memorization of the text, but also three things, right? The text, the definitions, the key concepts. Ask yourself, when can I pray sitting down? Just okay. Can I give a precise answer like the text, right? Test yourself. Make up questions. 4, partner for the purpose of memorizing. And once you've memorized, review your memorization. How do you review your memorization? There's 3 types of memorization review. There's short-term review, that whatever you've memorized right now, right? You need to review it for it not just to be in your dhakira, right? The ulama talk about the dhakira, which is your short-term memory. And then you have your hafidha. Then you have your long-term memory. But the long-term memory has an outer chamber and an inner chamber, so to speak, right? So when something is in your dhakira, you memorize it short-term. So you review, it stays there. But it'll go. That's like the visitor who's at your door. Is he at Seekers? Yeah, because they're at the door. But you have to let them in. But unless they're sitting in class, they're not yet in class. So you have to kind of get them into the inner chamber. So you need short-term review. But you need to have ongoing review of all memorization. So it goes from short-term review, short-term memory, into your long-term memory. But then there's basic long-term memory. It enters there, but it can leave. But you want to have it in your deep long-term memory so it remains there. The people of knowledge we've seen, Sheikh Adib Kallas, if he was asked a grammar question at the age of 80, he said, Ish qal ibn Malik? And just pause for a moment. And he had istihdar of Alfiyat ibn Malik. Close to the age of 80, he said, I don't know it. And he'd be able to quote the 2 lines from Alfiyat ibn Malik like this. Or some issue comes up, he says, هذا ذكره ابن هشام في المغني, مغني اللبيب, في باب كذا, and it's like he's citing the text, and this, and this. That is to know something, right? to know something, someone asks you about qada and qadr, you're able, فَأَدَّاهَا كَمَا سَمِعَ, you're able to convey it the way أهل العلم. Yet the talib ilm is the one who is on the footsteps of the people who have come before them. That is the talib ilm who has it, right? So the ongoing memorization to go from the dhakira to the hafidha to the al-hafidh, you need to, but into the deep hafidha, to the deep long-term memory, so that were you not to review it for a year, you still would not forget it, right? And that requires active repetition. And there's three things that we aspire to master: the text, the definitions, the core concepts, and critical issues. You can define it as 3 or 4. And last thing before we close, that why are we memorizing? Why are we mastering, right? We've talked about the personal benefit of this and the ummatic benefit. There's no merit in complaining about the state of Islamic scholarship, or why aren't people teaching, why aren't people studying? The question is, what are you doing? What are you doing, right? You're not responsible for changing the world, right? You're responsible for being part of the change. And being part of the change is to have something that you have taken on, that you have benefited from, and that you can convey in a manner that benefits. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us to lift our himmah and to commit to the path of mastery, seeking the good pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then next class, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, we will be beginning the text itself, looking at Imam Shurunbulali's opening. We'll be starting the class right on time, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, to give ourselves the full time. But we wanted to give these 3 introductory sessions. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين. And I apologize for the delay in starting today. There's some very exceptional contingency that arose. You may have questions on this. Let's practice. If you haven't registered, if you're online, you haven't registered the class, do register. It's free. You should just go to the Seekers Guidance Canada page. And let's practice that. Ask your questions related to this class on the class forum. Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. Sidi Zain will be liaising very closely with me about addressing the questions. So let's ask the questions related to this. Normally, as you know, we have time at the end, but we're running late for Maghrib. So we apologize, but just practice the after class questions, because we try to race through a lot of concepts related to mastery in terms of preparation, attendance, and review, and what we want to master and memorize. And it's not difficult. As Ibn al-Wardi says in his Lamiyah, لا تقل قد ذهبت أربابه إذ كل من سار على الدرب وصل. Don't say its people are gone, for all who tread a trodden path reach. That is the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, on the tongue of His Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that's what the ulama tell us and what we see from the example of the people of knowledge.